By the way, I have 8:30 on the iPhone, so
Okay.
yeah.
Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So fabulous to be with everybody. Let us thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. והערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. So our very rich topic this morning is how do we understand the mitzvah that is done with a mixed motive? And of course, the most recent example of where this comes up is the new rule that the governor announced, which is if you find a 75-year-old that you can take to get their vaccine, you can get your vaccine too, even if you're younger than 75. And Michelle, let me just start with you. What happened when that was announced? How did our community intersect with this new development?
So we have to go a little bit farther back than that because, of course, when it was announced that 75-year-olds could get their vaccines, we had a few people who reached out to us and said, if anybody's having trouble scheduling, I'm happy to schedule. And you made a plea to the congregation to please come forward. And a trickle of individuals who were willing to step forward to help people schedule their appointments with nothing in it for them. And then, of course, the governor announced about the ability to take a 75-year-old and you would get a vaccine too. And suddenly our phone lines and our emails were ringing off the hook. We literally had to tell people, I'm sorry, we don't have 75-year-olds who have asked for this. There were so many people who wanted to do this mitzvah.
Right. So our question is, you know, it's a mitzvah to take a 75-year-old to get a vaccine, but if the reason you're doing it is so that you can get your own vaccine, is it still a mitzvah? Is it a little bit less of a mitzvah? Is it not a mitzvah at all? So let's put this question on the back burner. We'll come back to it. It's our orienting question. This is a familiar conundrum in synagogue life, in institutional life, in life itself. And I want to give a hypothetical that raises the same issue in a different way. Okay? I've been thinking about this. Imagine, this is a hypothetical, that I was a very talented stock picker, that I just was really good at picking stocks, and as a result of which I made many millions of dollars, and I was a big philanthropist. And then that's not the case. But what is the case is, let's say I just love Elias Rosenberg's davening. That is the case. And let's say I can't sing. That is the case. Let's say I approach the synagogue's leadership, and I say, I would love to endow the senior cantor position at Temple Emmanuel. And what I'd like to do is give the temple $10 million to endow Elias's position. But the stipulation is, and you can do with it whatever you want, no strings attached. The lay leadership, the leadership of the synagogue, figure it out. The only thing that is involved is I want his position to always be known as the Wesley Gardenswartz senior cantor position. And so whenever, on his letterhead, it's Elias Rosenberg, the Wesley Gardenswartz senior cantor. When we get back to doing Project Manna is going to be done by Elias Rosenberg, the Wesley Gardenswartz senior cantor, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 questions. First of all, does the synagogue take the money? Okay, which, by the way, hint, is the easiest question in the history of synagogues, right? We should be so lucky. And then the second question is, how do you see my act? Is it less of a mitzvah because I want my name attached to this gift? Elias, what's your thoughts?
Well, let me begin a little bit with a, different thought. So I always say that when I grow up, I want to be like Rabbi Garden Schwartz. That's my, that's my hope. One day I grow up and I'll be like Rabbi West. And this morning I wake up in the morning and I said, I have a new haircut. Going to change a little bit. I'm going to put on socks that will knock everybody out. And then Rabbi West comes on board with those socks. He's my idol. And then he says that he's offering $10 million to secure my position. Aleinu lemalchuyot.
So,
Amen.
how would you feel about, how do you feel about the name attached to it, and does it make it less of a mitzvah?
Well, now seriously talking, it's an interesting question. It's a little tricky. On one hand, I will feel like, wow, it's amazing that somebody appreciates me and what I do so much that is willing to give a donation so high. Second, I would feel like it's great because, I don't have to worry about my position. But to be honest, to you, third, I would come and every day I will see in my office your name. I'm not so engaged with that now,
By the way, I hope one day you have that problem. I mean, a lot of positions, like David Wolpe's great rabbi, he's like the whatever rabbi at Temple Sinai, because somebody did that for him, and his name is always attached to that.
And by the way, many people do that, of course, not in their own names, but in name of somebody else who they love,
Right.
which is seen in our Jewish landscape, certainly in our modern Jewish landscape, as a tremendous mitzvah.
Right, and certainly universities, often, tenured professorships are a chair. That's a big kavod if that happens. So, Dan, does that make you think less of me? I give $10 million, but I want my name. Do you think less of me or not?
So there's a couple things. I just wanted to first just backtrack a tiny bit to what Michelle started off with. The fact that that our congregation initially did not respond the way that the Jewish people responded in this week's Parsha, Teruma, when
Right.
God said, Tiku v'tichud li Teruma, and that people just stepped forward and gave and gave and gave till we had to say, stop. You've given enough. So that was kind of interesting. That had to be some kind of caveat to that, some kind of addition. So that was a little interesting to think about this week's Parsha.
Right.
The other thing is that you're saying, what you're suggesting is not new news. I mean, you think about so many hospitals and other places where the constructions, the buildings are named after the person who gave all of the money. I don't.
Right.
Yeah. So, and
That's the way the world works.
Right. Exactly. And I don't think that that's any less. I think that you really don't think any less of a person if they want their name
Right.
attached to that. Because I think, for instance, if you're donating a wing of a hospital to, yes, it may be saying, oh, look how fabulous I am. On the other hand, you're also doing a mitzvah.
Right.
When you're donating a room in a synagogue, when you're donating all that kind of thing, you're saying, yes, I'm doing this as a mitzvah. Now, should a person maybe not want to have the name to attach to that because the glory is really not about that person, but the glory
Right.
is really about the actual structure or
Right.
position that they're endowing. I think that's a higher move, but I also don't think I would not think any less of the person who says, I'd like this to be called, after my name.
Okay.
So can I just say, I love this, except for that this scenario that you brought is really
Right.
value neutral. There's no harm caused by your giving $10 million to endow Elias's office. It's only upside.
Right.
There's really only upside here. I think some of the challenge about Find a 75-year-old, which was originally intended for those who are caring for a 75-year-old and therefore part of that 75-year-old safety net.
Right.
Like if the person who's caring for you gets sick, then you're in a lot of trouble.
But it wasn't intended
It
to
was
create a
not-
Craigslist
Correct. It's
feeding
not
frenzy.
necessarily intended, I'll pay you
Right.
$1,000 to take you to
Further
go
thing.
get a shot. And the issue here is that it's not a zero-sum
Right.
game.
So let's take a look at plugging this issue into our sources, because the Talmud has a lot to say here, and I think it actually brings all this together. So here's the scenario. There's a few sources in the Talmud that speak, I think, directly to this issue. The context for our first couple of sources is the fact that there are two mitzvot in the Torah that say that if you do this mitzvah, you will be guaranteed a long life. One, of course, is famous, Kabed Ravicha ve'erimecha, if you honor your father and your mother, Laman yarichun yamecha al pnei ha'adamah, so that your days will be lengthened. So if you honor your father and your mother, that gives you long days. And the other is an arcane one from Deuteronomy, late Deuteronomy, which is called Shiluach HaKain. If you see a bird on a nest with sitting on eggs, and you want the eggs, you have to shoo away the mother bird. Shiluach HaKain, send away the mother bird. And if you do it for whatever mysterious reason, the Torah says you'll be guaranteed long life. And so this story begins, and it's a famous story because the story postulates that a father says to a son, hey, would you climb up and shoo away the mother bird and get me the egg? And the son obeys the father so that he should get long life, and then he shoos away the mother bird so that he should get long life, and he then falls off the ladder and dies, okay? And this is a famous story because the person who sees this is Elisha ben Abuya, who's a rabbi who becomes a famous skeptic / heretic and says in a different source than the one we have, late din v'late dayan, there is no judge, there is no justice, if this could happen. The Talmud tries to wrestle with this, and this is our context. And at first it says, well, maybe it never happened. Fake news, it didn't happen. Answer, no, it happened. Then take a look over here. Now I'm on page 1. But maybe at the time, the son was thinking about committing a sin. So even though the son did the right thing, he obeyed his dad, and he shooed away the mother bird, maybe he was thinking some sinful thought. And then the answer is, Machshava ra'a eina kadosh baruch hu mitzarpa l'ma'aseh. God does not regard a bad thought as a deed. You don't get punished for your bad thoughts. So, in other words, you...
Really?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wow. That opens up a new world for me.
Yes. Your bad thoughts, so long as you are tempted to do X, which you know is not a good move, if you don't do X, the fact that you think about doing X, that you're tempted to do X, itself is not actionable. It's not a sin. It's perhaps dangerous because if you're thinking about X, maybe you'll do it.
What about the Yetzer Hara? What about the impulse to do bad?
Right. So you're not. So that's, and I think that's exactly what this is saying. We are born where we contain multitudes. The Yetzer Hatov, the Yetzer Hara. So the fact that our Yetzer Hara, our inclination, wants us to do something that's bad, if we resist, and it just stays in the realm of thought, that thought is not actionable. That thought is not a sin. Let me just read one more text here, and which fleshes this out. It continues the conversation on page 2 of the handout, and then it says, "But the Holy Blessed One does not regard a bad thought as a deed, for it says, if I saw sin in my heart, the Lord did not heed it." So if I'm sinning in my heart, then God does not heed it. It's not a sin. Then it goes on to say, about halfway in there, it means that the Holy One, blessed is He, regards a bad thought that produces fruit as an actual deed. But the Holy One does not regard a bad thought that has no fruit as an actual deed. In other words, if the bad thought just stays in your head, you're good. If the bad thought causes you to do a deed that is bad, that's the problem. And so so let me pause here. Pure intent is not problematic. It's when intent leads to deleterious action that it is problematic. Michelle, how would you integrate these texts into our issue?
It's so complex because, I mean, here we have our Jimmy Carter text. It's
right.
Not about what I'm thinking, right? It's sitting in my heart. And I think that's really profound and really powerful. I think when we graft on the question of the sudden frenzy to take 75-year-olds to get vaccines, we bring a really complicated gloss in that you're not just thinking, right? If you are first of all of this is created by the fact that there's a shortage. If there were no shortage of vaccine and there were no line and sort of an idea of who should get it first and who needs to be protected first, then fine, everybody goes to get the vaccine as they go to get it. It's actually a good for our world, for everyone to be vaccinated. We need to be getting as many vaccines into as many arms as possible. So in an ideal world, there's no competition. It's not a bad thought to get your vaccine. It's actually a great thought to get your vaccine. That said, when there are other perhaps frailer people before you, then you have the question of, is this not just a sort of a bad thought, but a bad deed? In other words, are you taking
You're displacing.
away something from somebody else? And that's complicated
But-
because honestly,
Yeah.
right, the way that vaccines work, this could be a good thought in a good way. And it could be that anybody who goes to get a vaccine, regardless of their intention, is actually contributing to the greater communal good.
Right. So that's, but let me just, I want to understand your thought. And then Elias and Dan. Whether it's a net good for a 40-year-old who doesn't have comorbidities or a 22-year-old who doesn't have comorbidities to get a shot by taking a 75-year-old, whether that's a net good or a net bad, given the overall health picture, I leave that to the health experts. That's above my pay grade. Okay? Let's posit for a second, though, that it's a net bad. Let's just posit. I don't know if it is or not.
Then
I'm
it's
not
a
a
deed,
doctor.
not a thought.
Right. Hold on. Okay, here's my question. So let's say, I'm 40 years old or I'm 22 years old. I take my 75-year-old grandmother to get her shot, or a 75-year-old neighbor to get her shot, or I find a 75-year-old that I pay $100 to get a shot so that I can get my shot. Okay? And let's posit that that's a bad, because the bad fruit is that some more frail person doesn't get the shot because there's a vaccine. Here's my question. Is it, in terms of we're thinking about moral deeds, have I committed a moral act if I'm a 40-year-old and I do that and it takes the vaccine away from somebody else? Or is this the responsibility of Governor Baker or the government who made this possible? In other words, I'm a citizen. I want to do pikuach nefesh. Yeah, I know that somebody else, but the government has incented me, basically. It said, find a 75-year-old and take it and get him. So am I doing an immoral, is that my bad fruit, or is that the system's bad fruit? Morally speaking.
Well, so I would say here's the thing. In the end, if you really do find a 75-year-old who actually needs to be taken, then you have done a mitzvah, because that person gets to go get their vaccine. The issue is with the abuse of this.
Right, but as a result, I've not taken a shot because I've been her attendant. I take her there, I get the shot, and somebody else who's more deserving doesn't get it. And the question morally is that on Governor Baker or is that on me for taking advantage of the system? Dan.
First of all, the governor does not control our own morality, right? So whether he says this or not, we have to think about our morality. The other thing I want to go back to, talking about, deed versus thought. This is why the Torah says lo tachmod, right? It says, the difference between jealousy and coveting, right? If you're jealous, that's fine. Well, not fine, but people, you can be jealous of so many things, so many people, as long as you're not acting on it. But when you covet something, you actually are acting upon that, right? So the Torah actually is the Torah actually is explicit about that. I think it says, that we don't covet, meaning we don't act about something. It doesn't control how we think. The Torah God can't control how we think. God creates us, but we think differently. So that's one thing. And again, the governor, the governor doesn't control our morality. So whether he says this or not, if we in our own personal life think it's immoral for me to do this and take it away from somebody, then don't do it. The other thing, but again, as Michelle said, it's very layered and very complex. Because if you're a caretaker or a grandchild or a child of someone who's 75 and older, by your becoming vaccinated, you are actually protecting that person, and other people as well. So, yeah, and you can say, well, if I don't do the vaccine, that means that some other person who may be 95 with several medical issues, and that person becomes ill and God forbid passes away, do you stay up nights thinking it's my fault that that person passed away because I took the injection, or would you say, this is really it's really about the layering of the fact that I'm seeing my grandmother, my grandfather on a regular basis, and now that I've been vaccinated, I can feel much safer about that, and I can also create a stronger safety net for the rest of the community.
Wow.
Very
Yeah,
layered.
so
Very
a couple
layered.
of things I want to say. First of all, I want to clarify what I said before. I don't want anybody to think that I'm not encouraging you to do a 10 million donation to secure my position. All right? So that's one thing. Second, yes. Second, I believe that my first reaction to what you are bringing up, Wes, is the more people get vaccinated sooner, the sooner we'll get rid of these windows open here behind us. So that will be fabulous. Now, that being said, it's a tricky question. It's a tricky question. I have my thoughts and I think about it, and it's both. What you guys said is yes, we have to take care of our elderlies, our seniors, and then we can wait. We can wait. Healthy people, younger healthy people can wait. But then we didn't come up with this idea. It was the governor. It was what we believe it's thoughtful leadership
Right.
who thought that maybe everybody can get vaccinated faster by doing a double,
Right.
instead of just one person.
And by the way, that's working in Israel. When they first started and they said, hey, we have shots hanging around. If you bring
Right.
somebody, you can get one. Help
Right.
to get the population vaccinated faster.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I wanna bring in a second text, which this turns out to be very repercussive, and Michelle's brought some additional text where the same idea is quoted. This is on page 3. This is worth just doing in Hebrew, because it's just one of the top 10 quoted rabbinic teachings, and it's so rich. La'olam ya'asok adam b'torah u'v'mitzvot afilu shelo lishman. Okay, so the person should do Torah, study Torah, and do mitzvot, even if it's not for the sake of the Torah or for the sake of the mitzvah. You have an ulterior agenda. You want a plaque, you want honor, you want something else, right? Shemitoch shelo lishman ba lishman. Because you start not for its own sake, but as a result of doing the deed for the wrong reason, you come to do the deed for the right reason. In other words, is another slant on the same issue, that intent is subsidiary to deed. Do the right deed, even for the wrong reason, because eventually if you do the deed for the wrong reason, you will get shaped by the deed that you do, and you'll come to do it for the right reason. Top 10 rabbinic teaching, and Michelle's got a bunch of other sources in here where the Talmud comes back to this idea again and again. So here's my question to you guys. First, how does this basic principle intersect with your lives? And how does this basic principle intersect with our issue on the vaccine?
So I actually think that this is not true. I think that there are people that will continue to do good deeds but never feel any sense of connection to that. That they're not doing it. They're still going to be doing it because of that they feel aggrandized, that they are just superior to others. They may have more money. They may have maybe physically better than other people, that kind of thing. So I think that many people who are in the position of doing these kind of things, this is not necessarily true. On the other hand, does it do good for the world? Yes, but I don't think I don't believe that that actions change people. I think that people have to change with the way they think first, even though their action, even if they continue to do actions that are helpful. I don't think that by doing the actions that changes people. Not everyone. There are people for whom that might work, but I don't think that that's all universally true.
That thank you. Then, and it comes to mind.
Am I wrong?
No.
I'm probably wrong.
It comes to mind something that you, Wes, used to say all the time. I remember vividly many times when you teach kids, especially 4th graders, 5th graders, to put on tefillin. You always give these beautiful explanations, and then you always say that it will grow in you. it will grow in you. It's uncomfortable. It's ugh, and then it will get better. It will get better. I'm still waiting for that for me. So
I think you're doing pretty well with tefillin. I give you a strong B+ on the tefillin.
feeling uncomfortable about that.
Yeah.
No, I do it Sephardic way. Anyways, no, yeah, it's fascinating. I'm always thinking about this phrase that you guys bring often, that it says a person against his will.
Is
Against as well.
a person against their will is a person convinced against
Against
their
his
will is of the same opinion still.
Exactly. So how do you match that with this teaching where it says, you keep doing it even for the wrong reasons and you'll get good?
Oh my
Right.
goodness. I love that you said that because it's such a good transition. My favorite, this text that you brought, Wes, is like one of my all-time favorite texts because the idea that maybe you're initially convinced to do something really for an ulterior motive, but ultimately it's going to get you to be in a place where you do works of justice and righteousness. And by the way, if you look at social science today, the book Nudge is a really popular kind of a proposal of exactly this kind of a thing. You get people to the place where you make their choices such so that they're going to do a sort of a good thing, whatever it is you want them to do, you're going to put that before them with some personal incentive that they would have. And there's some piece of the governor's thinking, I would imagine, that had to do with that. We need people to get 75-year-olds, and therefore we're going to put personal incentive to solve a problem, right? And I don't know what he was thinking, but if that's what he was thinking, then here we have, toch lo lishma, I need a personal incentive in order to get me there. But ultimately, the deed is going to be done. And perhaps, maybe after I'm vaccinated, I'll say, hey, that felt so good. I'm protected. I'm going to go try to find some other people to help in this way. Or I'm going to become a vaccine advocate because I believe that we need to fight the problem of people who are afraid of getting the shot or who are skeptical of getting the shot. And we bring along people who then change their mind. So that could really be a thing. And that text is so popular that, as you see on the next page, on page 4, it's actually repeated again and again and again and again throughout the Talmud. I mean, I only brought 3 other examples, but there are many more. It's in Psachim, it's on Arichin, it's in Horayot, it's all over the Talmud, the Mashalo Lishma,
Right. So can I just pause for a
Balishma.
second to talk about and then I'll
Yeah,
hand it right back
and
to you.
then-
But the genius behind this is that you control you. You can't control your recalcitrant heart, and you can't control your recalcitrant feelings, but you can control your pliable hands. So do what you can control, do the deed, even if your heart is not there or not there yet, and that will make for a better world and maybe even a better you.
Right. And right
Okay.
on the flip side, because we're Jewish, and so we have this extraordinarily beautiful complexity that Shai Held always puts as the answer to almost everything in Jewish life is yes and yes. Right? We have both sides. And if you look at Nazir on page 4, 23b, which is actually on the very same page as Mashalo Lishma Balishma, a little bit before the passage that was
Right.
brought on page 3, you have Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, greater is a transgression committed for its own sake. If I have intention about my transgression and I do it for the sake of heaven, than a mitzvah that's performed not for its own sake. And in fact, right, this idea that if my intention completely matters. And if you look at brachot, which is a little bit below that, it says it is not stated simply all who are fruitful, but rather all who fulfill, but rather all who fulfill them, those who perform these actions as they ought to be performed, meaning those who do such deeds for their own sake, for the sake of the deeds themselves, not those who do them for their own sake. Rava continues, one who does them not for their own sake, it would have been preferable for him not to have been created.
Well, you don't want Rava on your development committee for the synagogue or for the university or for the hospital or for the museum. Because if Rava's on your committee, all those institutions are screwed.
Right.
They have no money. There's no wings, there's no symphony, there's no research, there's no tenured positions. You're screwed. So the text that says mixed motive is good is attuned to actual human beings, the way they actually live, the way they actually roll, with all of our flaws and all of our complexity. By insisting on some pristine standard, you have to be Mother Teresa, otherwise we're not interested, that's just not very helpful to real people.
So I want to go back to your very first proposition and think about, Wes Gardenswartz as the genius financier who gained all of his money. Yeah, fake news. Who gained?
Say more, Dan.
Wait, this is the part you don't want to hear.
Okay.
Who was able to become so wealthy because he duped hundreds of thousands of people out of millions and millions of dollars, and now he is using that ill-gotten gain to then do mitzvot. So Cantor Elias Rosenberg, the cantor of the Rabbi Wes Gardenswartz endowment, that money is actually tainted because it came on the backs
Right.
of.
So that's a separate case.
No,
That's a separate case. That would be like the Jeffrey Epstein senior cantor position. Obviously, nobody would do that.
Right.
But this is if the money was not ill-gotten.
Okay.
If it wasn't ill-gotten, it was fairly gotten, played by the rules of the marketplace fairly. But it's all about my ego and my turf, et cetera, et cetera. That I think that is. So I want to come back to what we now have, Michelle, as a result of these texts that you brought, are two different, A and A prime. One that says what's most important is what you do, not what you feel. And the second that says no, what you do is only really counts if the feelings are pure. And my question to all of you is, which move do you find more helpful for you, and which move do you find more helpful for actual human beings that you know? And then how does that intersect with our vaccine question? Because we have two different models here.
See,
Dan?
I think you're not going to do. I think you're not going to do something unless you really have your mindset to do it. So it's that flip side. The Torah says na'aseh v'nishma, that we will do it, and therefore that we will learn to then understand it and do it for pure reasons. I'm not sure that's actually true. I mean, speaking for myself personally, I won't. I'm not ready to do something until I'm actually ready to do something. I won't take the action until I'm ready to do it. Like our sixth graders putting on tefillin. What's going to happen is at some point they're going to need to come to a minyan, God forbid, for a loss or something. Then they might say, okay, I remember all this stuff. I'm going to start to do it, but I'm going to start to do it because I have a reason to do it, and now I understand it. But I'm not going to do it prior to that. That kind of thing.
But Dan, you are Minion Man. You're Minion Man.
It's your new name.
You're every morning, every evening Minion Man. You mean to tell me you're just jumping up with excitement to do Minion every morning, every evening? You're going to be jumping up with excitement at 5 o'clock for Mincha today? No, you don't do it because you want to do it. You do it because it's weaved into your warp and move. That's what you do.
And there are so many things we do in our everyday life. We lose sight of it. I'm late coming to Temple Emmanuel because I was sleeping. Let's put it that way. And I get to a stop sign, and I'm in a rush, and then there is another car. Do I want that car to go first? I don't want that car to go first, but I do it. So I'm doing it against my own will. There are so many things that we lose sight in our everyday life that we do that not necessarily we're 100% convinced of them.
Yeah, I think the text at the bottom of page 4 actually is an attempt to resolve some of this very big ground. There's a lot of daylight between Mashallah Lishma, Ba Lishma, and between a deed only counts, like if you have intention. And the Pesachim text down at the bottom of the page says that those who direct their eyes to the fine portion with the intention of taking that portion for himself when dividing an item with others will never see a sign of blessing for them. In other words, that if you are doing something for your own sort of selfish reason, right? And you're looking, oh, I see what other people have and I want that. And I'm going to take that for myself before it is my time to do that. In a sense, the consequence of that is that you will never see a sign of blessing. You may not feel about yourself that you have been the person who you should be. You'll never feel kind of sort of comforted with that action. Whereas, masha lo lishma ba lishma, if you are doing something not for the right intention, but ultimately can come to a place of continuing the mitzvah, you realize, hey, you know, maybe I took this 75-year-old and I'm not part of that protective bubble around that person, but I am part of a protective bubble of the world, and therefore I owe the world something. I need to go out and expand that bubble. Then that intention, it's not just about putting your eyes to somebody else's portion, it's about increasing everybody's portion.
Okay, so I want to just bring this to a close by asking the following question. If Governor Baker had said to you, but we rewind the tape, and they're thinking about doing the vaccine buddy system, but they're not going to do it, okay? And Governor Baker comes to you and says, based on your own moral intuition and based on Judaism, as you interpret the sources, do you think the Commonwealth would be well advised to create this incentive system where the 22-year-old or the 40-year-old takes the 75-year-old? What's your answer? Michelle, what do you advise Governor Baker before
so for me, I have a dear friend who's taking care of her mother 24 hours a day, who has cancer and who is in a horrific medical state where if my friend were to have gotten sick at any point in time, the entire support system around the mother would collapse. And so I see the value in giving the shot to those who are taking care of others. I see the shot if you have a child who is incredibly ill, who has an autoimmune issue, and you're a caretaker, it feels to me that that actually is part of the protective bubble around that person. So the intentions that the governor had, if the intention was to have caretakers, that feels like a worthy intention.
Who's going to argue? Who's going to argue with that one?
Who's going to argue with that?
I'm not letting you off the hook that easy.
That said,
no, let me give you the case. I'm a 23-year-old graduate student at BU with a computer and with a cell phone, and I go on Craigslist and I want to find myself a 75-year-old.
So that said, the challenge is, of course, always being specific in what we want and what we need and how we are actually enabling the line to progress. And in this case, I would say we probably could have dealt with a few more eyes on that particular law to be able to clarify that this is for for the sake of the community.
Yeah. Michelle, your first answer, the kind of the Mother Teresa answer, who's taking care of somebody, who's the caregiver, that's an easy case.
Right.
The harder case, and what I think what makes this issue so hard and so fascinating and so rich and so applicable, is it takes human nature as we are. Human nature as we are, we come with cell phones. Right. We come with Craigslist, and we're looking for an angle. Yeah. Not everybody, but a lot of people are looking for an angle. And the question is...
Find me a 75-year-old.
Find me a 75-year-old. And by the way, those are a lot of our members. To come back to your orienting frame, before the governor's announcement, we didn't have so much action there. My sermon didn't generate so much action there, but the governor's announcement generated a ton of action there. And the question is it a good move to kind of take people as they are with all their grisly, layered complexity and work with that? Or do we ask people to reach higher? Elias and then.
So I agree with Michelle in terms of
what does that mean?
Mother Teresa, that the idea there are so many people that are vulnerable in our society that are with autoimmune things and that could really and should be benefited of the vaccines regardless of their age. Okay, now if you present to me raw the idea that anybody healthy 23-year-old could get a vaccine by helping others, my reaction is no. Unless that person is willing to put $10 million to endow my position. That will be something to think about it. No, but, but speaking seriously, I come from a society that everybody is waiting for the opportunity to take advantage of the other person. And one thing that I love about America that for many people is hard to see, but for my own experience and based on my own experience, usually doesn't happen here in the way that it happens down there. So my inclination is to say no. No, it's not, again, 10 million, but when you have somebody who is completely healthy and no,
Unworthy.
I would advise the government not to do it.
Unworthy.
Unless we bring some specifics, about who can get the vaccine, who goes together with the senior.
Mr. Nesson, or Lord Nesson.
Yeah, I'm 100% with both Michelle and Elias. Yeah, I think that in terms of leadership, again, as Michelle said, it wasn't well thought out. Anybody that shows up with a 75-year-old gets the shot, and that's really not good leadership to do that. I think it needed to be more thoughtfully thought of, and I think that the case where people that are responsible for other people, that if they're younger, they should be able to do that. So I agree with both of you guys about that. And I think that I'm just being very negative today, but I think that human nature is very much, it's all about me first. That the very few people have altruism at their center. Very few people do. So, and I just say, just one other thing. So I just want to just go back and do a tiny comment about what you said about my davening, Wes.
Yeah.
Which is that I was not.
No, you don't get the $10 million. I get it.
Which is the fact that in terms of I did not become a regular davener until I decided to do that. No, going to shul, when I made it my own decision to do that, my action. It was my thought, my intent first before the action. So this is the thing that I've been harping on today too.
I think the challenge of this case, though, Dan, is that in the ultimate good, right? Every arm that gets a shot is actually protecting every other person. So on some level, even that 20-year-old, maybe especially that 20-year-old who's going to college parties, actually being protected could theoretically be a tremendous societal good. So if it were not for the shortage of vaccine, it actually is good to go and get your shot. So this last
But Michelle, we have to say that it's much more deadly in seniors.
No, for sure. So wait,
people.
this last text that we have actually is reminiscent of something that I had heard before, but I couldn't find the text that I had heard, so I found this one instead from Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Schneerzen's secretary, which is, it brings this beautiful idea that if a physician prescribes a medication for a patient and you have all the intentions of taking the medication, and you just look at it, he places it before him and he gazes lovingly at it and keeps declaring all day that he believes in the effectiveness of the medication, but doesn't take the medication, then it doesn't actually work. Whereas on the other hand, if the same patient declares that he does not believe in the effectiveness of the medication and nevertheless takes it, it will help him. So the intention in this case is not actually what matters. What matters is getting the medication into the person who was prescribed. And so from that perspective, the text that I had heard is the poor person doesn't care if the person who left bread for them on their doorstep actually had a good intention or not. They still get the bread. And at the end of the day, we can ask the ethical question about all of the competing challenges in the way in which we are rolling out this vaccine. Ultimately, the important piece is to get the vaccine into as many people as we possibly can.
Amen.
Amen, from your mouth to God's ears. I just want to end. I mean, there's been a lot of wisdom about the vaccine question and ways that might have been rolled out with a little more wisdom and more thought. I want to just zoom out a little bit and end with a reflection on deeds versus feelings. So I think Judaism has something very profound to say here. What do you do with the flickering heart? What do you do with the recalcitrant heart? What do you do when you're not feeling it? What do you do when there's a divide between what you know you should do and what you want to do? What do you do when there's a divide between what you know you shouldn't do, but you're sorely tempted to do it? And all of us have that. It's built in. That's the Yetzer HaTov, the Yetzer Hara thing. And I was reading a piece by Lord Jonathan Sacks, in his book of commentaries on Parshat V'Etchanan, and it's about love. And he says the following about love, and which is that you need, a feeling, and he talks about how love is just a very common verb, ahava, in Deuteronomy. You need feeling, but you also need like an infrastructure of deed around that feeling when the feeling falters. And he talks about giving advice to couples who are getting married. That he says, I just love this. We wed in poetry, but we stay married in prose. We wed in poetry, but we stay married in prose. We wed in poetry, meaning that there's feelings that you feel, but those feelings our hearts are fickle and mercurial and unreliable and human and tempestuous. So we need deeds to reinforce the feelings. And what I love about this body of law is that it tells you when you're not feeling it, it's okay. It's okay. Or when you're feeling a desire to do something that you shouldn't do, but you can't get this desire out of your head, it's okay. That's how we're built. What really matters is, do we have the infrastructure of deeds that support us and reinforce our best selves? So with that, our morning services are going to beginning in 15 minutes with the Wesley Gardenswartz Senior Cantor, Elias Rosenberg, who's going to be leading our services. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.